and welcome from our screen to yours. I'm delighted to be here with Giulia today and talking about your beautiful show that just opened. And without any further ado, let's kick off. Yes, let's do it. And I'll ask you, how did you come to the title of the show, which obviously bears a reference, arsenic, to the movie Arsenic and Old Lace, which you cunningly and quite wittingly replaced with pigs?
Well, there are quite a lot of reasons. I mean, Arsenic and Old Lace, it's a movie actually I discovered some years ago, and I like the title for chromatic reasons, as I felt that arsenic, is this color that is quite close to paint gray. If you see, arsenic can be a little bit blue or green. It's pretty close to my watercolors. And Old Lace, it's used as in the Pantone language. It's kind of really light rose that I could use, that I use quite often in my canvas. It's like a very light rose, maple yellow. And so this is the first reason, but mainly is because the main character of this movie is this very evil woman who's poisoning all these men and hide their bodies, so it's kind of witch. And so one of my recent shows title was Lackativa, so the mean one, the mean girl, with this double, there's a reference to this false friend between French and Italian. So Lackativa, so the mean girl, the mean woman, can be understood in French like the prisoner, la captive. And so I'm really playing a lot of this potential emancipation of women in being evil, actually, because when a woman is moving from where she's supposed to be in society, she can be easily considered as evil. So the reference to arsenic and Old Lace is there, but I substitute this poison with pigs, and so I play with that, with this figure of pigs, which are quite often represented in my painting, and in particular in this show. The first canvas I made with the name Pigs actually is about Europe, and it refers to this financial language when in economy we used to talk about I wouldn't say evil, but like the poorest countries in Europe, so Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And so there's a reference to this economical union. And at the same time, of course, the symbol of the pig is even a reference to the French movement, #MeToo, which in France is balance ton porc, so throw away your pig, your jerk. I mean, I don't know if jerk really means pig, but it's something next to that. I mean, really a quite filthy and uncomfortable man. And moreover, of course, the pig is even the animal that Circe, I don't know how to say in English, so this mythological figure used to transform humans in pigs. So there are quite
a lot of layers. And I think we'll come back to the idea of the pig, especially in relationship to this metaphor of the European Union and its perception of different countries. But in referencing the movie, you were also kind of touching on another big theme for you, which is this figure of the witch, which is ambivalent in many ways and carries a lot of meaning. And I think we could start by looking at this work that's actually right behind us, but you have a larger version on screen that in a way carries this idea of the witch, and perhaps you could elaborate what it means for you, why it's such an important figure.
Well, it's quite easy for me to start with this painting. Actually, this painting, its datation, can I say that? It's quite weird because I really wanted to say that I started it in 2014 and finished it for this show. And actually, I started it during a residency in the north of France in a particular moment, and I was really getting more and more interested in feminist literature. So I just read some historian feminists, French historian feminists like Michel Perrault, Yannick Ripin, and Annette Becker. My accent is quite a mix between Italian and French, and so sorry, I apologize for my English. But anyway, in this particular moment, a creator friend, Giulia Andreani, offered me this book, which is quite important for my work, which is Flavia Frigeri's The Witch and the Caliban, which is very, very interesting because it's even an economical analysis, but an historical analysis of chases of witches in time, to understand it as the cause of women discrimination in Europe for hundreds of years. And so I really started like kind of statement to paint these witches, I would say a little bit before this idea of witch was so fashionable. And well, and then I stopped painting this painting, and so it was important for me to bring it now to the show, because what is important for me in this show is, of course, the subversive potential of this figure of the witch as a woman who refused to be a woman as the patriarchy wanted to be. So
she's like really a symbol of rebellion for you against those societal norms that have like taken
of
over
course, because it's
a long time.
It's really a symbol, because I'm not really interested in witchcraft, and I don't really think it's even an idea that I have of art and of artists. I believe more in historical kind of materialism more than in prophetic or magic point of view. So yeah, for me, this idea that they are kind of the fact that in this painting these women are, of course, it's an Halloween picture at the beginning of 20th century. It's quite nice that the show is finishing for Halloween. Actually, I just thought about that. But anyway, they get transvestite. And this idea of being transvestite and put other clothes is quite important in my work. So it's like putting a new skin, like a snake.
Yeah.
And when I started this canvas, I just finished all this work on the First World War, and clothes in painting of this period, it's very important. And I did this show called Vestembuto in Latin, so which means to transvestite, to metamorphose oneself.
The dressing up.
And the dressing up in this moment, in this emancipation particular moment, was important because women took the place of men in professional parts of society.
Yes.
And so that's why I painted like grey women or fire women, and their clothes were in between women and male clothes, so it was a kind of being transvestite, and these clothes were showing the transformation and the movement to emancipation. So,
which is very interesting, this idea of clothes as representative of a symbolical moment to switch from the woman in the household and the woman taking its place in the outside world. And, and I think you were pointing and describing this work, saying it's an image of witches from the beginning of the century, and this kind of brings to the fore one of the big issues with your work, which is the kind of atlas that you have of images and how you kind of bring them together. And perhaps we can move on to the next set of images.
So these two images, actually, I can take out images really like a lot of artists do from the internet, and I keep them filed. Yeah, I keep them filed for sure. I don't know how to say, like in a kitchen, you know. I keep them somewhere, I'm gonna use them. But most of the time, I work in different archives, and so these two watercolors you are showing are really belong to particular moment of research. So I found out while I was in Rome an archive of demonstration pictures of feminist demonstration in Italy during the 70s, and the archive is even on the internet, and it's called Her Story. And so I particularly found interesting to use to get an inspiration from this particular photograph, so that you see with this woman carrying
the one on the right.
Yeah, I don't know how people see it.
Oh yeah, true. It's the one labeled Firenze gennaio 75.
Exactly. Actually, so it's a particular moment in history, and so this watercolor, it's important to point the historical dimension of witches in the feminist European history, because actually it's the Italian feminists who, with their motto "Tremate, tremate, le streghe son tornate." You have to, I would translate it, you have to shiver because witches are back.
Yeah.
Can I translate it?
Yeah, shiver, shiver, tremble, tremble, the witches are back.
And so I wrote it down in kind of cartas, how do you say, the demonstration panels.
Yeah, the kind of plaques that people have when they go at demonstrations.
In a bar, I wrote down Baba Yaga, which is the Russian for witches, and so I introduced this element to underline the historical dimension of this coming back of witches in recent 40 years. And actually, to keep the historical dimension, this demonstration in Florence was one of the most important, as it was. There were a lot all over Italy, but particularly in Florence, because it was there that an Italian doctor, Dr. Conciani, who was a fervent, can I say in English, fervent defender of the strong defender. Thank you. Strong defender of the right to abortion, was arrested in Italy. And so these groups of feminists came into the street to do a demonstration against this arrestation. And only some years after, the right to abortion was approved in Italy.
And it was quite late. I mean, we had it in Italy.
Yeah, because I mean, for me, that's why I often use the chronological dates in my paintings. Actually, in Italy, if you imagine, this history of Francaviola and the idea that there is the Preparatory Marriage. I talked to you about this. Incredible. For people who are not Italian, it's totally kind of fiction.
Yeah.
Thing that basically a man who raped a woman in Italy was allowed to not to go to jail or not to be judged.
He wasn't persecuted.
He wasn't persecuted.
Considered.
If he reparates the act, marrying the young woman. And so this part of the Italian law was abolished only in 1801. So, I mean, it gives kind of dimension.
Yeah, and also I think, what your image is bringing to the is the 70s was a very strong moment for feminist movements in Italy, and they were very recorded in archives. But as you were pointing out, you also kind of rework those images. And I think that's true perhaps of the one next to it, even more so, where you really like,
so this image is actually, this picture come from my atlas, but actually was working on a totally different, not so totally different, but on another subject, because I was in a residency in the south of France, and I was working on this part of France during the German occupation, and so I work on this little village, Fresnay-le-Gelat, which is not known outside France, but it really has a very heavy history, because there were, I don't know how to say that in English, but le fucilazioni.
Okay, we'll come back.
Well, anyway, I was working on the Second World War, and so I found out that in this village before the war there was a very important, how you say, équipe, group. A basketball female team, which is for this epoch. It's quite, for this time, it's quite interesting and weird. There were a lot in the town, in the village archives. There were a lot of pictures of sport women, and that's even something that interests me a lot. So not particularly in this show, but I often paint women who do sport in this moment, because it was even kind of as emancipation. But anyway, this group of women are playing basketball, but actually I had it, instead of the basketball, actually I put a kind of head. Yeah, so at the first sight you can imagine they are playing, so they are cheerful, and at the same time you feel like they were taking out from each other hands this head, so it's quite violent. And for me, this watercolor called ironically sororité. So I don't know how we would say that in sorority maybe, which is a word with which that come quite a lot, and it's quite, I would say, even fashionable in this moment. And actually, for me, it's ironically used because I wanted to point out something, which is the violence between different feminist movements, like it was in the 70s, but now it's, I mean, it's particularly violent, and in particular this opposition between radical and essentialist feminists and queer feminists, and so all this, all this quite violent struggle between different feminist point of view, and for me it's really a pity, and in some way I wanted to point it out because I feel that it gets really weaker, this movement. It weakens this movement.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of internal rivals between the very notion of what feminism is and what it means to different people. Yeah, and also I think you kind of, by applying this idea to a historic image, you also give it like a context that goes back.
Of course.
But what I like of that image, and I think again it's something that carries on to this work, is always this idea you play with ambivalence in history, but also in the present. And I think this, perhaps out of all the works in the show, is the one where you really see it the most, in terms of taking a historical image that can refer to the present, but also having figures like the two young girls, which are at once very pretty and very scary. But maybe you obviously can elaborate on both of those things more.
I think it's a little bit related to my Wednesday Addams feminism.
We all had an Addams moment. Did you dress up like her when you were at course?
But my hair was not long enough. I would love to be like Wednesday. Anyway, so these little girls that come, actually they're often there in my paintings. It's not only something, auto-referential, can I say that in English? But it's, for me, it's the symbol of something en devenir,
in becoming,
yeah. And even like a kind of childhood of feminism, often. And in this case, these figures are at the same time creepy, at the same time a symbol of hope, because I did this painting really just after the lockdown, so it was big canvas I was able to do in Rome at Villa Medici, so I was able to travel again and to move, and I was so happy to have a big wonderful studio in the Villa Medici. And well, actually the starting point is this archaic picture of nurses with an ill person during the Spanish flu, and we heard a lot about the Spanish flu as related to the actual pandemic. And I had these two young girls, and the title actually evokes this allegorical and ironically situation of Europe, where all the negative, all the, how would I say, all the problems, all the issues of Europe became particularly visible and dangerous, underlined by the pandemic.
Yeah.
So actually these two little girls could be actually la paix et l'espoir, so peace and hope coming into Europe, but at the same time I wrote down this kind of house, no exit, so of course it's a relation to Brexit, to all these countries who want to get out of Europe, all the xenophobic populist and populist movements like springing out from European countries. So really, I think that this painting it's talking about the general malaise. It's like being bad, which is particularly present in this pandemic moment.
Yeah, in a way it's true. Crisis, like the one we're going through, bringing out all of the cracks in the system.
Of course, and at the same time, crisis is this very particular word. It means always changing.
So that's why the two little girls could be our like beacon of hope, if you want to see them that way. I guess it's up for interpretation, whether you want to see them as nice girls or as slightly more ominous ones. And speaking again of a project that you actually undertook when you were at Villa Medici the first time around, which to me is very interesting because, like all of your works, really are very layered, but this in a way is even more so layered, because you really think about the place of women in art history. You also generally think about the place of women in history, but in this particular case in art history, and you're making us look at the meaning of women being ruled out by the official stories and how can we think about bringing them back into the present.
Yeah, what interests me in these triptychs is I would say maybe the patriarchal domination through iconography, because what is important in this triptych, and maybe then we can say something for if there's any English public, that Villa Medici is the French Academy in Rome, and I used to work on the pioneer, first women artists who were allowed to be fellows in this institution, and I like the ideas of painting allegories because it's totally old-fashioned, and so I like to exploit this, all the academical potentiality to be an act of resistance in some way, because, well, I know that the allegory of painting, sculpture, and music is quite weird for an artist of my generation, but actually was pointing out something important. I mean, French Academy in Rome was, of course, at the beginning of 20th century, a very academic institution, and allegory are one of the most, with history painting, a very classical and academical subject. And what I wanted to point in this triptych mainly was that in allegorical painting, women are often naked and they are muses. Yeah, and like if they were just a surface or an object in a composition, but these disciplines.
So at once you see them as, like, you know, the objects, but also representative, symbolic of.
That's representative of something belonging to man.
Yes.
Because actually that was the point. I mean, art was, or this idea of creation. Minor art, like applied art, portrait, animal paintings were acceptable for women. Thank you. But not the higher and the fine art.
Yeah, they were. I mean, history has long excluded them. They weren't allowed to do nude drawings, so that meant they couldn't do history painting. But these three figures specifically, as you were saying, reference the history of Villa Medici, and that they were the first free.
Yeah, so they are kind of allegory, and moreover, it's kind of double portrait. It's each one of these three paintings is a portrait of the first women. So, for example, if we start from the painter, I wanted to make a portrait of Odette Robert, who was the first painter accepted as a woman at the Villa Medici, and I have really. For these three women, I had really a few archive pictures of them. And so I had the idea to ask that I really never did that before, ask to my contemporary fellows, three artists, to become those women. Yeah, some ways, to become the ghosts of these three women, these pioneers in painting, music, and sculpture, to be them for a while, and so to make a kind of fake portrait of them. And so for the first painting, it's a double portrait of Claire Labarre, who is a designer, and she was at Villa Medici working with me the same year, and at the same time with Odette Robert. Then the central one is the central one is Stephanie Solinas, who is a photographer, and actually I asked her to take the picture because as a painter I never take pictures. That's why I compose with existing photographs. Maybe we can speak about that later. And at the same time, it's even a portrait of Luciana Delmans, who was the first sculptor coming to the Villa Medici in 1911. Yeah, and then Liz Charles, who's a writer and very close friend of mine, who actually looked like a little bit, looked like Lily Boulanger, who was the first musician and composer coming to the Villa Medici in 1914.
So it's really very layered what you're doing here, and you know, it really begs the question of representation, misrepresentation of women, and sort of rectification for history. But well, here you're really kind of envisaging these pioneers. Then you have a series of works where instead you depict actual, you know, pioneers as they looked.
Yeah.
And I think just to start with one that brings us to Britain,
yeah,
this portrait of Mary Stopes, who was the founder of the first birth control clinic in Britain. But perhaps you, again, can tell us a bit, how did you come to her?
It's maybe bound even to one of the watercolor we saw before. Actually, she was quite a rebel, as she she was a scientist. She was quite rare in this career. Can I say that?
It was rare. I mean, women were scientists
in
at
the
this
Victorian
time.
period, so there were no many women studying science. So Mary Stokes, and she interests me a lot, and I found this picture of her, and I really to bound this pink picture to the title Pixel on Lace. I use the title of this painting, L'Empoisonneuse,
which is like poisonous female. It's
who was to say that the woman, you know, that this defiance. How can I say this? Defiance. Defiance. So this defiance towards women are not just housewives. No, maybe it's too hard, but I mean, I like the idea that to represent some way even the issues that Mary Stokes as a woman could have at this moment, because she was like resisting somewhere, some way to the. She wrote Married Love, so she really was questioning about this idea of freedom of women to have children or not. She was against abortion, but she was ready for contraception. Can I say?
Yes, birth control.
So birth control is quite interesting, and of course she's a pioneer too. So I really want to bring this figure in the show, and of course she's English, and she has old lace.
Yeah, I love she has a detail of the old lace, so she's our old lace woman. But also when we were talking about this, you were saying to me the fact that she was an early pioneer of science almost, you know, meant that people regarded her as some sort of witch. There was that moment of, you know, proximity between witchcraft and science.
That's why I treated like this, all this scientific items on her desk, like kind of witchcraft.
Yeah, maybe a bit the vibe.
Witchcraft studio, and I had actually this marble portrait of Mithridat. I don't know how to say in English. It was a mythological figure, so a man who used to take some poison, as he was imagined that it would be homeopathic, so he was so afraid to be poisoned by a woman that he killed himself taking little doses of poison. So, I mean, it's
pretty perverse, I would say. Another of your pioneers, the sculptor Augusta Savage.
I found, well, she's really a pioneer because she's the first Black woman coming to, she had a grant in New York to be able to come and study at La Grande Chaumière, so it's very important at the time, academy in Paris. And she was working within this movement, the Harlem Renaissance. And I find her history and her work working at the Villa Medici, because she was the pupil of a quite perverse sculptor, an artist, a French artist, who was at the Villa Medici during the 20s. At the end. Actually, no, I'm saying it because it was in 1910 to 1913, and then he went away and he was put in a madhouse because he tried to kill the first sculpture woman at Villa Medici because he was jealous and she refused to get married to him. And so I studied this his name was Felix Veneto, and after this period he met house and he went to jail because actually he tried to kill the woman, but everyone said that he was crazy, and of course she said no to him. So of course,
how could she dare
some
say
people
no?
in the Italian press, can I say that?
Yeah.
Many people said, okay, that's not his fault. I mean, you put women within a male, historically male institution, so of course it's getting crazy. And actually I found out that Augusta Solari was stupid, and so for me this portrait it's like to say that I really would like to know more about this artist and this period in the United States, so I will certainly go on working on her.
Because we should say you're also an art historian.
Yeah, I maybe have been for 2 or 3 years an artist.
But I think you still have very much in your approach, in your research, it's very far, like it's part of the conception of your works. There is this very strong research component.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, research is often the basis for my painting, so I really like to define a subject like an art historian and then develop that in painting. So yeah, that maybe comes really from my university period at the Sorbonne. There's another subject.
But I think it still very much comes across that there's like very thorough thought process and research behind what you're doing. But kind of moving on to another iconic figure that perhaps in this case I will ask you something about the technique instead, because as those who are listening have probably gauged by now, you tend to work with the same palette over and over and over again, with then some exceptions like here, where we have these polka dots suddenly popping up.
Yeah, these dots actually came out. I use sometimes like dérayures, do you say that? Stripes. Yeah, stripes or dots. When I want to mix a color image with an archive black and white image, and so these dots are. I like the idea. I was telling to someone before that I like the idea. These dots are immediately bound to kind of conceptual painting like Baldassari one. And I like the idea that it's an element for me that underline the narrative dimension and historical dimension of my painting. So there's kind of détournement of this visual, quite conventional dots and color points. And in this particular case, it's this portrait of Rosa Luxemburg. I wanted to portrait her and to refer particularly in this portrait to one of the last letters that she wrote from the jail, where she said that she found herself nearer to, that's very hard to say in English, to these birds. It's particular bird that she used to feed. So it's Mésange charbonnière, ciccia allegre in Italian, but in English I have no idea. And so I took like this, I used this application which is called Pantone. So it's used by architect and designer, interior decorators, and so that give the possibility to like underline the main colors of a picture. And so I took this Mésange charbonnière, so this
Greek teeth.
Greek teeth.
Okay,
we have super teeth.
We have a new word.
Greek teeth, like titi, like the little yellow word. I mean, anyway, and so it's a way to speak about this letter for me.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I always use this quite unique color, which is paint gray, and it was actually the color that I used to use to prepare my drawing when I was in the fine art school in the Academy in Venice. And so I used to use acrylic, and then I went on painting with traditional oil painting with colors, and so when I started painting again, I don't know if it's clear, I try to go fast to think about it. But anyway, this paint gray was just for me when I was learning how to paint. Was just the basis for my paintings. And I found this color really beautiful, but when I was a student, it was nothing more. And then when I started painting again in France, I really get deep into, I studied a little bit the story of this color, and actually it's a color, well, it's an English color because his name comes from William Paint, who was an English painter, and this color is really beautiful because somewhere in this color theory, Goethe speaks about this color that shadows have in between when the day starts or the day finishes, so it's quite poetical.
Okay.
And so I really made it mine. It was important to me because there was something that I didn't exploit it when I was in the art school, in the fine art school. And then I really realized that there was something important to me in this color because, for many reasons, because it put a distance between me and the subject, and at the same time there's something related to the screen because I had the idea this bluish color give the impression that it's like we take a photograph of a screen, you know, this bluish dimension. And moreover, there's something like, you know, this distant or something that comes from your memory, and it's about our collective memory, and it comes from far, and at the same time it's very present. And so it's like the color of a dream or something, which is here, but it's not really here.
And also it's like, it's not black and white, but it has that resonance of, as you say, when you look at the works, it has that resonance of like a lingering memory.
Of course, and even its color was created for watercolor, so it's not really a fine art and high art dimension, because watercolor is more the technique of young ladies and ouvrage de dame, you know, this thing. And so, I really like that my painting is a large scale, traditional painting. I use watercolor, I use acrylics with the watercolor technique, so
it has this effect. I mean, I think it's visible in the works when you look at them. And I encourage people to come and see them in the flesh because it makes all the difference in the flesh, in the blue. Especially, we have just a few more minutes left. So, do you want to say one quick word about this work and then we'll end on?
Well, this precisely, the title is Culte de ton corps. So,
we're back to the pigs. We're back to the pigs. Something like that.
Yeah, we are back to the pigs. Sorry, I thought you were translating the title, so I didn't understand. Sorry. We are back to the pigs, of course. So it's particularly a reference to the Me Too movement in France, and which is balance ton porc, so throw away your pig. And here Jean Copelet, so it's an historical French figure. She was a French sculptor. Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a very noisy alarm outside of the window.
le fond est secret, je suis sûre. C'est une dédicace. And so she's sculpting her whole piece. Maybe to throw it away, but anyway, yeah, there are many reasons for which I painted this canvas. I like the idea that she's working, she's sculpting, so she's really, this composition is really a statement for all the show, because it's something really important for me, is that all this thing about emancipation through art and emancipation through work, even beyond this, I mean, these patriarchal figures that you just, I mean, I like the idea that all this patriarchal domination is reduced to a little kind of doll that she's sculpting, and so redimensionate that.
Yeah, she's really pushing against the grain of patriarchy, and I think this is a good point for us to stop and maybe take questions. And I know Sarah is going to be handling that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for a wonderfully insightful talk. We have a couple of questions which I will read out to you. Giulia, this is from Daniela. And Daniela says, "It is wonderful how your work is influenced by specific locations and current political events. What is your research process when starting a new residency or preparing for an upcoming exhibition?"
Wow, yeah, it actually is interesting, because thank you for the question. When I had the proposal to show in London, my first idea was to work on a specific archive in London, and then something happened this winter, so it was not possible. So I didn't do that. But well, I really like the idea. For example, to prepare a show, I always think how the show works would make sense in the place where I show them. But it's even easier for me to think about that when I'm doing a residency, because residencies are really very important to me, because I can do site-specific research and meet people, and so really my work gets a lot influenced by people surrounding me, and so they can be militant, they can be researcher, they can be, I mean, it's always something about layers. But well, yeah, for example, it's easier to give some example, but for example, for the Villa Medici, I really prepare my subject in a month, so before, and then when I was in Rome, I really defined some places where I can have information about the life of these women artists in Rome and at Villa Medici. So I spent a lot of time with my nose in the archives, and so I wrote down notes, so a lot of textual elements, and then I had some iconographical research, and then all these things, I take them to the studio, and something goes on, and I cannot really define that it's something happening in the studio, and so it's hard to explain that in English. But anyway, you can imagine that my studio in a moment is like a police office with many things hanging all over, like text, images, little drawing, and all that is the material for the canvas. But I don't know exactly. That's why I'm not an orthodox art historian. I cannot really explain exactly my process, because something's happening in the studio so well.
Thank you, Giulia. We have another question from Marco, and he asks, will you use Payne's Gray throughout your future artistic career?
Ciao Marco. I think I know who's who's this question. Well, I think that I'm monomaniac enough to go on a while with this color because I really made it mine. And so I'm quite obsessional, and I think, yeah, I will go on with this color for quite a while because it's really a statement. I mean, it's really important to my work, and it's not only, it's more than a chromatic choice. It really gave a statement to my painting.
Okay, I think then we'll come to the final question, unless anybody else has something burning to ask. It comes again from Daniela, who says, you said that you don't take photographs because you're a painter. Have you considered experimenting with different media?
Of course, yeah. Well, it's not a...
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, as far as other medias are concerned, I did some sculpture, so already it's quite different from painting. I mean, it's another way of thinking subject because, well, if I did some sculpture, it's mainly symbols or portrait. I made some portraits, but yeah, well, hard to answer this question. When I say that I don't want to take picture myself, it's really because I've been thinking a lot how to do painting with existing pictures. So really it was a statement for me. But well, I think there's something I could do more is to be transparent about my research process. And so sometimes I think that I could do some kind of documentaries, for example. So have some films documenting the process towards painting. So that's an idea. But as far as photograph is concerned, actually I say things, but sometimes it's not true because sometimes I take photograph. For example, the only self-portrait I have for me with the mask, with the biking man. So the artist microbe, I don't know how to say in English, but anyway, I took a selfie with my phone and then I painted that. So, you know, I'm a liar like all artists. But from a conceptual point of view, I really like the idea that I use archive pictures and I compose with them. And if I did some painting, some photograph actually when I was a student, I was really attracted by pictorialism. And something I forgot to say is even I want to evoke this Victorian photography in this show, which is quite important. Think about Giulia Andreani.
Yeah, yes.
This, so I like this idea that medium can also be melted together, and and particularly particularly because I'm a painter, so painting is often considered not like contemporary art, less than photography or other mediums. So I like this idea that everything is melted in the end in the studio. I don't know.
We've had one final question, and then we'll close for the evening. It's from Theo, and he says, given your tight relationship to photography, how do you relate yourself to digital photography? Do you think a Giulia Andreani living in 50 or 100 years in the future will be able to do the same work with digital photographic archives?
Wow. The only thing that like this I can answer is that it's quite interesting because for me there's an echo, there's a relationship between digital photography and high definition image, and I often say that I like to, my paintings are also images and they are low def images, so I would say that I resist to this digital over present images all over, and very high definition, and I relate myself, of course, to traditional and argentique. You say that too. So, film photography. Okay. So this image is coming up from a chemical mix, and not from pixels and computer. Well, I really don't know. Maybe we will have the chance to speak together, but I really don't know how to answer to this question. I didn't think about that before, so it's interesting.
Well, it leaves me just to say thank you so much to Giulia. Thank you to Flavia. We're so excited that we could do this, although it's not in real life. We encourage you all to please come and see the exhibition. We're on Dover Street, 41 Dover Street. And thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Bye.
Bye.